In the realm of true crime, there are cases that cast ominous shadows over our collective consciousness. These are the mysterious, disturbing crimes where the identities of perpetrators are hidden, concealed, even through the relentless passage of time. These are the cases where the perpetrator remains unknown and justice remains unserved. Welcome to Perpetrator Unknown, the podcast that dives deep into the abyss of these bone-chilling narratives and unsolved crimes. We are here to illuminate the darkness, to unearth answers to the mysteries that have confounded investigators, fractured families, and left communities haunted for years.
I'm your host, LA. Join me as we journey into the heart of these mysteries. Together, we'll review the facts of the case, piece together evidence, analyze the crimes, and explore the lives forever altered by the events we'll uncover. In this inaugural series, we delve into a year that started with promise, but descended into darkness. Beneath South Florida's sunny exterior and facade of tranquility, a sinister underbelly emerged, spawning a sequence of events that continue to elude comprehension. In Season 1, we're digging deep into a collection of heinous crimes that remain unsolved to this day. Although we cannot definitively state that these events are connected, there are eerie similarities, including that each one originated in 2007 at the upscale Town Center Mall in Boca Raton, Florida. If you haven't yet delved into episodes 1 through 5, I strongly recommend you take that detour first. In those installments, we embarked on our exploration of the series of crimes that gripped this community. In today's episode, we'll continue to delve into the haunting mystery surrounding the unsolved murder of Randi Gorenberg. I'll disclose details from extensive conversations with her son Daniel. Additionally, we'll take a closer look at Randi's husband, Stewart Gorenberg, and explore a few pages in the book of his life since her tragic demise, some of it recently uncovered and rather unsettling. Despite the nearly 17 years that have elapsed, investigators have been unable to officially rule out Stewart or Daniel from having potential involvement or a possible role in the homicide, adding a unique layer of complexity to the narrative. Always remember that as we immerse ourselves in the intricate tapestry of details behind every unresolved case lies a victim and a family waiting for justice.
So fasten your seatbelts as we set forth on a voyage into the shadows. This is Perpetrator Unknown.
In the last episode, we learned that neither Randi's husband nor son have been definitively excluded as potential figures in her murder. It's crucial to underscore that neither of these individuals is considered a suspect. However, their potential involvement or role in the crime has not been conclusively ruled out by law enforcement, despite the passage of almost 17 years. This information fueled my determination to delve deeper into each man's life in the years following Randi's tragic murder. As a result, after reaching out for an interview, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with Daniel recently. Daniel did not want the interview to be recorded, so unfortunately, you won't hear directly from him, but I'll be sharing the details of our conversation. And although Stewart did not agree to meet with me, I will be divulging some new information involving him that I've uncovered. Let's begin with Daniel's story. Following his mother's passing, he faced serious drug-related felony charges. The court mandated that successful completion of a rigorous 12-month residential drug treatment program followed by a period of probation would clear his record. Daniel did satisfactorily complete the program and probation, leading to the dismissal of those charges and allowing him to maintain a clean criminal record. Over the years, he has not only sustained his sobriety, but he has also successfully forged a career in the security sector. Daniel and I first met at a beach north of Boca Raton. He's no longer the 25-year-old we remember from media photos, having matured into a middle-aged individual. Yet, at 41, his appearance hasn't changed drastically. There's a touch of facial hair with hints of gray, and his bright blue eyes, inherited from his father, shine behind his dark lashes. Despite his father's eyes, in most ways, he bears a striking resemblance to Randi, not just in looks, but also in personality, as he shared with me. I wasn't quite certain what to expect. The email and text message exchange leading up to our meeting conveyed a bit of tension. But, in native Floridian fashion, Daniel casually strolled up, wearing flip-flops and shorts, exuding a relaxed vibe. Much like Randi, he appears to find solace in the embrace of the ocean. He enjoys surfing, although a temporary hiatus has been enforced by a recent medical issue. Beneath his seemingly edgy exterior, there exists a softer, more vulnerable side that emerges when he feels a genuine sense of connection. Our conversation unfolded extensively, and Daniel displayed remarkable openness and candor. We delved into the past, where I asked him to revisit that harrowing day, March 23rd, 2007, the day of his mother's brutal murder. As he shared his recollections, it became apparent that he was the last family member to have seen and spoken with Randi on that ill-fated day. During our conversation, there were moments when he would pause, as if transported back in time, reliving the haunting events. During our discussion, Daniel confirmed many details that had circulated in media reports. Yes, Randi had been watching John Legend's performance on the Today Show that morning. Although I had always heard it was Good Morning America, I didn't press him on that detail. He confirmed that Randi did watch the singer on a morning show that day. No, he said he had no idea that she was planning to head out to the mall that day for the CD. He pondered for a moment, reflecting on the what-ifs, and wondering how life might have been different if she hadn't gone to the mall that day, or if only he had stayed home. Daniel shared that, at that time, he had recently graduated from the University of South Florida, where he majored in criminology and psychology. He had initially been hesitant about moving back home, a dilemma he had shared with his mother. This reluctance mostly stemmed from the strained relationship he had with his father, Stewart, a fact that Daniel candidly acknowledged. The strain in Daniel's relationship with his father had become increasingly evident over time, with the shift commencing when he was around 15 years old. Daniel traces it back to not wanting to follow in his father's footsteps. Stewart had expressed a desire to pass on the chiropractic business to Daniel in the future. The practice, while small, was financially rewarding and provided the Gorenberg family with a well-heeled lifestyle. Nevertheless, this career path did not align with Daniel's interests or personal aspirations. At one point, he held ambitions of becoming a police officer, though this vision was shattered by the tragic murder that occurred. Although Daniel didn't explicitly articulate it, I intuited that Stewart might have been disappointed with the career and life choices his son ultimately made. During the time Daniel had moved back home, he had been employed by a company that sold diamond saw bits, but he quit the job just before his mom's death. Daniel claimed that Randi was aware of his decision and his plan to spend time with his friends on that fateful day. Residing under his father's roof came with a strict set of rules and expectations. Therefore, Stewart remained unaware of his son's unemployment status and his plans for that Friday. Daniel recounted vividly how, on that afternoon, he had been unable to reach his mother, which was a source of growing concern. Uncharacteristically, the calls were going straight to her voicemail. As Daniel arrived home around 4 or 5 p.m., he had no knowledge of what was about to unfold. Unbeknownst to him, PBSO investigators were already there when he arrived, surreptitiously conducting surveillance at his residence. In his own words, he later learned that detectives had been literally hiding in the bushes. The fact that he had been trying and failing to reach Randi since earlier that afternoon left him in a state of distress. He admits his stress and anxiety related to his inability to contact his mother might have been conspicuously evident to the detectives as they observed him smoking and pacing along the driveway. During our conversation, we also touched upon the unusual behavior he exhibited with the cleaning supplies and paper towels taken from his car. He smiled at this mention and openly shared that he's meticulous about his vehicles. Anyone who knew him back then would have understood that there was nothing unusual about him toting around cleaning supplies. Even today, as I personally witnessed, he maintains a supply of spray bottles, paper towels, and lint brushes in his truck. After that revelation, I took great care to ensure he didn't catch sight of my vehicle's interior. Daniel continued to recount the events of that fateful day. Once inside, as he powered on the television, breaking news unfolded before him. Horrific reports detailed an earlier incident at the nearby Civic Center involving a black Mercedes SUV, gunshots, and a woman forcibly pushed from the moving vehicle. Captivated and increasingly concerned after recognizing the vehicle in the footage and the proximity of the event, he remained glued to the television. Yet the profound and personal implications of the unfolding tragedy had not fully dawned. It was only when the screen displayed a body bag, the very one that shrouded his mother's lifeless form, that a wave of unease washed over him, realizing that something was terribly wrong. Still anxiously awaiting his mother's return home, Daniel retreated to his bedroom. When the doorbell rang, he assumed, as he often did, that his father would answer it. It wasn't unusual for Stewart to see patients at the house, but little did he know that with the ring of the bell that day, detectives had appeared at the door, burdened with the heart-wrenching task of delivering the dreadful news to Stewart. As Daniel remained sequestered in his room for another 30 to 45 minutes, he was suddenly startled by the loud pounding on the bedroom door and the stern commands of detectives. "Daniel, come out with your hands up." Soon, he found himself seated in a PBSO vehicle in the family's driveway for an extended period, barraged with questions from investigators. How, under these dire circumstances, was he expected to answer their questions and simultaneously process the traumatic, harsh reality that his mother had been cruelly torn from his life? At this critical juncture, I pressed him about the false alibi, a claim he presented to law enforcement, asserting he had been working on the day of the murder. However, this assertion faced contradiction when his employer refuted the statement. Daniel, in our conversation, admitted that he couldn't recall all of the details related to what he told detectives during the hours he spent detained in the police vehicle. But he vividly remembers the intense questioning by investigators, all while grappling with the shocking reality of his mother's murder. Acknowledging that he had fabricated the alibi, Daniel confided that his motivation was to shield his father from the truth. He wasn't ready for Stewart to confront the revelation that he was no longer employed. The weight of the circumstances had left him unprepared to handle that additional layer of complexity at the time, especially given the already strained relationship with his father. Later in our conversation, Daniel shared that less than 2 weeks after his mother's death, his father had thrown him out of the family home, adding yet another layer of turmoil to an already tumultuous period. Daniel opened up to me about his past struggles with anxiety, mentioning that during his college years, he had been prescribed medication to manage his symptoms. However, when faced with one of the most traumatic experiences one can imagine, the loss of his mother in a brutal murder, he began self-medicating as a way to cope. His misuse of prescription drugs began to quickly escalate, leading him into a battle that so many face: addiction. The situation worsened when he was arrested for forging a prescription. His time spent in jail was incredibly challenging, as he had to endure withdrawal from the drugs without any medical assistance, all while investigators were relentless in uncovering additional instances of forgery and thus more charges. There were 4, maybe 5 arrests in all, he recalls. Daniel mentioned that family members had visited him during his time in jail, but it's clear that the one person he had relied on most for unconditional love and support couldn't be there. Daniel holds dear the memory of Randi, not just as his mother, but also as his best friend. Randi was a true gem, radiating kindness and love, with unwavering devotion to her family, particularly her children. As I gently asked him about his parents' marriage, he recalled a time at a young age when they briefly separated. However, he shared that his younger sister, Sari, seems to have no recollection of this period. Daniel believes, for the most part, that his parents were content in their marriage. Nonetheless, he acknowledges that they likely made an effort to shield any marital issues from their children. Public records confirm that Randi filed for divorce in 1987, but later reconciled with Stewart. This fact was not known to Daniel. He only remembers that his parents were separated for a time, living apart. What he also didn't know is that during this period, on November 25th, 1987, his mother filed a motion for an emergency hearing and injunction, seeking a restraining order against his father. According to the court, Stewart filed a motion to postpone that hearing, and it remains unclear if that hearing ever took place or if the restraining order was eventually granted. In mid-1988, court records show that Randi and Stewart reunited, and the marital dissolution case was voluntarily dismissed. Unfortunately, detailed records for the case were destroyed in the early 2000s prior to Randi's death. Sadly, there's no way to know what prompted Randi to file for that restraining order or what allegations she had made against Stewart at the time. Daniel was visibly taken aback to discover that his mother had initiated the process of obtaining a restraining order against his father. After learning of this during our visit, he reached out to his grandmother, Ida Elias, seeking insights into her recollections. At the age of 93, Ida unfortunately did not recall that specific incident. She explained to Daniel that it was a particularly stressful period, and her memories from that time are limited. Stewart was a dedicated father who worked hard to provide for his family. He had a self-made success story, having risen from humble beginnings, perhaps even poverty. However, when it came to being a husband, he may not have fared as well. According to Daniel, he has not ruled out the theory that his father may have been involved with escorts or prostitutes, as alleged by law enforcement. The dates and times provided by detectives align with the suspicion. As Daniel shared this information, I detected his profound disappointment and perhaps even a sense of revulsion regarding his father's alleged actions. In addition, Daniel recounted a revealing incident that had transpired about a decade before the tragic murder of Randi. He recalls a time in which his mother had stumbled upon a receipt tucked in his father's suit pocket, revealing Stewart's possible involvement with a swingers club. This unsettling discovery brought Randi to tears as she sought comfort by confiding in her mother over the telephone. As Daniel shared this with me initially, I was unfazed. I presumed that many men might visit strip clubs from time to time, which seemed relatively ordinary. However, my perspective shifted suddenly when I realized he had mentioned a swingers club, not a strip club, two vastly different scenarios. At that moment, I understood the source of Randy's deep distress. Curious on his thoughts on whether his father might be connected to his mother's murder, I asked Daniel. He responded by lifting his hands, his palms up, expressing uncertainty. Deep down, he can't fathom his father being involved, but he cautiously adds, "You never know." Looking back, he now considers the possibility that his mother might have been contemplating the end of her marriage once Sari completed college. Daniel lives with the daily torment of not knowing what truly happened to his mom or why. He replays various scenarios in his mind, seeking answers that continue to elude him. Sometimes he entertains the theory that the intended target might have been Stewart, and Randi was an unintended victim that day. Detectives had introduced this theory years ago, considering Stewart's interactions in a seedy area of Broward County. If someone had followed that vehicle and targeted their house, Randi could have returned home, crossing paths with the killer there. The lack of guard gates and security systems meant there were no records of her entrance or exit. Theories are only speculation right now, but both Daniel and I hold on to the hope that someday the truth will emerge and answers will finally be found. When I broached the subject of whether Daniel harbors suspicions toward any of his friends or acquaintances at the time, he mentioned that he has none except possibly for a single individual who is no longer alive. When questioned about the allegations made by his friends following Randi's murder, I specifically asked him about stealing the jewelry of a friend's deceased mother. He emphatically dismissed that claim as patently false. It should be noted that the individual who had made that claim, a former childhood friend, has had extensive involvement with the criminal justice system throughout the past 20 years. As we continued our conversation, we delved deeper into the details of the crime, the tragic event that prematurely extinguished Randi's life. Daniel emphasized Randi's toughness, attributing it to her Brooklyn roots. He notes that she grew up in somewhat of a rough neighborhood. He firmly believes that she would have fought fiercely for her life, and the evidence left on her body substantiates this. Her broken and torn fingernails bore witness to a significant struggle. The absence of her shoes led Daniel to suspect that during her courageous fight for survival, Randi had kicked her assailant. In response, he believes the killer took her shoes, possibly in an attempt to erase any DNA evidence they might contain. Although the perpetrator took her shoes, he did not remove any of the jewelry that Randi wore, worth at least several tens of thousands of dollars. According to Daniel, the reason for this was most likely very simple. The killer couldn't remove her jewelry. Randi's rings fit her fingers so tightly that she needed petroleum jelly to remove them, thus making it nearly impossible for the assailant to do so, especially as she fought against him so hard. As we spoke about the precious jewels that had not been taken by the perpetrator, I inquired as to whether Daniel knew the origin of the costume jewelry that Randi had been found wearing, the rings unfamiliar to her family and friends. To my surprise, Daniel had the answer. It appeared that Randi, who wasn't known for wearing inexpensive jewelry, had purchased them at her hair salon. During our discussion, Daniel inferred that Randi buying the rings might have been an act of kindness and her way of supporting someone in need. I also asked Daniel about the dryer sheets and baseball cap in Randi's vehicle. He stated that his mom was a smoker she kept the dryer sheets in her car simply as an air freshener. As far as the baseball cap, he had no direct knowledge of it. However, he indicated that it very well could have belonged to him or his father. It's evident that Daniel's love for his mother remains strong as he gazes at her photograph every day and cherishes her memory with unwavering devotion. This profound connection is symbolized by a heartfelt tattoo in her honor, as well as a pendant adorned with one of her precious rubies that he wears close to his heart. As he spoke about his feelings after the murder, he candidly shared how anger overwhelmed him, leading to heightened suspicions toward everyone and everything. Understandable, I thought to myself. The trauma he endured, compounded by a pre-existing anxiety disorder for which he self-medicated, must have left him feeling like he was battling the world alone. In the days immediately following Randi's murder, Daniel took it upon himself to comb through Murakami Park, hoping to uncover any trace of her belongings that the perpetrator may have discarded, such as her missing purse, shoes, or any other personal items that might help bring him closer to the truth. Daniel reflected that, at the time, he held a strong belief that he could contribute to solving the case, driven by his academic background in criminal justice and his profound love for his mother. He vividly recalls the day when investigators were at the pond behind the Home Depot in search of the murder weapon. His deep commitment to finding answers was evident, as he had also showed up to search, not realizing detectives would be there as well. Even when authorities told him he was interfering with the criminal investigation and asked him to leave, he adamantly refused, vehemently insisting they call his attorney. His unwavering resolve to stay was fueled by his love for his mother and the quest for justice in her name. Today, Daniel carries a softer and more reflective demeanor, characterized by his thoughtful introspection. His connection with his grandmother, Randi's mother, Heidi, remains exceptionally close. Despite her age, Heidi lives independently, and Daniel and his sister maintain regular check-ins to ensure her well-being. Among his family members, Daniel's bond with his grandmother appears to be the deepest. They share a special tradition of reminiscing about Randi each time they are together. However, Sari, Daniel's sister, remains unable to broach the subject of their mother. Whenever he attempts to discuss Randi, she quickly changes the topic. People cope with trauma in diverse ways, and Daniel indicated to me that he believes Sari has never fully confronted her own grief surrounding the tragic loss of their mother. The Gorenberg family undeniably experienced a deep fracture in the aftermath of Randi's horrific death. According to Daniel, his mother was the glue that held the family together. Today, the dynamics have shifted significantly, with Daniel no longer maintaining contact with his father. Speaking of Daniel's father, Stewart Gorenberg, I'd like to provide a brief update about him. In the years immediately following Randi's tragic death, the media shed light on various aspects of his personal and professional life. However, as time passed, it became apparent that he actively sought to minimize his media exposure. When I reached out to him, he remained unresponsive to my attempts at communication. With unyielding tenacity, I personally approached him one evening while he was walking his dog, hoping for a meaningful conversation. Before introducing myself, I complimented his adorable dog. He smiled, but the atmosphere shifted noticeably as soon as I disclosed my identity and purpose. In a brief moment, he conveyed that 17 years had passed, and he had no inclination to revisit those painful memories. Even as I emphasized that my goal was to offer him an opportunity to share his perspective, something he hadn't done publicly, and that my sole aim was to seek justice for Randi after all this time, he stood firm in his request for me to leave and not return, despite our encounter occurring on public property. The oddity of the encounter reached a peak when he unexpectedly became angry, blaming me for making him forget whether his dog had relieved herself. This unusual turn of events added a bizarre and unexpected layer to our interaction. I left as my intention wasn't to traumatize him, cause him pain, or even annoy him. My sole purpose has been and remains the pursuit of justice for victims like Randi. Due to my unsuccessful attempts to engage him in meaningful conversation, the information I can provide about Stewart is limited to what's available in the public record and what friends and family have shared. So let's recap. In late 2008, the insurance fraud charges that had been filed against him were resolved with a no contest plea and adjudication withheld. His attorney explained that the negative publicity had compelled Stewart to close his practice, and he is currently retired. Public records reflect that Stewart maintains residences in both Florida and Colorado. But recent court records are more telling. These records have offered glimpses into Stewart's personal and intimate relationships. In 2020, a woman who we'll refer to as Naomi filed a petition for injunction for protection against dating violence in the Palm Beach County courts, alleging Stewart was both physically and verbally abusive towards her. Naomi claims to have had an intermittent dating relationship with Stewart for the 5 years leading up to the events in question. In the court documents, she made accusations of multiple incidents in which he allegedly held her against her will and damaged her phone to prevent her from seeking help. She further alleged verbal abuse and claimed he was inebriated during the incidents. Her allegations also included a peculiar episode in which Stewart threw a raw meatloaf at her, inadvertently causing her to slip and sustain a severe injury. Despite the accusations, it should be noted that this legal case ultimately concluded with a voluntary dismissal agreed to by both parties. I reached out to Naomi for this podcast, but she declined to comment. When I asked her if she ever felt that Stewart could be involved in Randi's murder, she emphatically stated, "I won't answer that question." More recently, however, in October 2023, Stewart found himself embroiled in another incident of dating violence. A woman, whom I will refer to as Lexi, accused Stewart of striking her across the cheek following a verbal altercation while they were traveling in a vehicle together. She stated that she retaliated by hitting Stewart back, after which he struck her on the other cheek, resulting in the loss of one of her teeth. She demanded that Stewart take her home, which he eventually did. Once Lexi returned home, she contacted police. Officers visited her, took a report, and subsequently arrested Stewart on a felony domestic battery charge. The officer writing the report indicated that the charge was brought about after considering the statements from both parties and the visible marks on Lexi's cheek, along with the missing tooth. During Stewart's arrest, an incident occurred in which officers alleged that he tensed up and pulled away as he was being handcuffed. As a result, he was additionally charged with resisting arrest without violence. Stewart bonded out of jail within days, and as of this writing, he awaits another court hearing on the matter. It's important to note that these are only allegations, and at the time of this recording, Stewart Gorenberg has not been convicted of any crimes. However, several days after the incident, Lexi filed a court case of her own in the family court. Lexi claimed that the couple had been together for 3 years and alleged that Stewart had a history of verbal abuse towards her. The case was swiftly settled with an agreed final judgment of injunction for protection against domestic violence. The parties appeared to have reached this agreement jointly, with no admissions by the respondent and no testimony given. The no contact injunction is enforceable until April 2024. Based on these unsettling cases, I can't help but think again about the restraining order that Randi sought back in 1987 and wonder what drove her to take that action. Had she been abused, battered? Had her life been threatened? Although we may never unravel the answers to those questions, it's evident that Randi's life was shrouded in complexity, far from the idyllic facade it seemed to portray on the surface. It's crucial to acknowledge that domestic and dating violence cases, like the ones I mentioned, often involve complex and emotionally charged relationships. However, they are typically not directly linked to violent crimes such as murder. While these legal cases offer insight into Stewart's personal life, it is essential to again note that none of the allegations have been substantiated in a court of law. Furthermore, these accusations do not inherently suggest his capacity to commit violent crimes. Sharing this information is a matter of public record and is not intended to imply the guilt of any parties in any of these cases, including Randi's. Stewart Gorenberg, like any other individual in the United States, is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. As we approach January 2024, Randi Gorenberg's case remains in a state of unresolved limbo, spanning nearly 17 years. There are no witnesses, no identifiable suspects, only a person of interest who has managed to elude authorities for a quarter of a century. Most tragically, the two men who likely held the deepest places in her heart still carry the stain of suspicion in connection with her gruesome murder. Join us next time as we pivot to uncover new leads and revisit the chilling case of Nancy and Joey Bochicchio. Could a known killer be the key to solving the mystery that still haunts Boca Raton? Don't miss the next episode of Perpetrator Unknown. As we dig deeper into the perplexing cases that comprise the town center mall crimes, we are left with more questions than answers. These tragic stories, which began in sunny South Florida, all took a dark and unexpected turn. The mysteries that surround these cases still exist over 16 years later, but the search for answers continues, and the quest for justice remains relentless. I'm your host, LA, and it's stories like this one and the lives we touch along the way that remind us of the enduring human spirit and the resilience of those who seek the truth. A very special thank you to Daniel Gorenberg for sharing his story with me. If you have information related to Randi Gorenberg's case, contact Detective William Springer of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office at 561-315-4188. Or if you have information related to the Bochicchio case or the Jane Doe case, contact the Boca Raton Police Department Detective Bureau at 561-338-1264. If you have information about any of these cases but would like to remain anonymous, you may call Palm Beach County Crime Stoppers at 1-800-458-TIPS. That's 1-800-458-8477. Finally, but no less importantly, if you are a victim of domestic or dating violence, please know that help is available. In the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is accessible 24/7. Reach out by calling 1-800-799-7233 or texting the word START, that's START, to 88788.
If you'd like to share your thoughts or insights about the podcast, please reach out. You can find our contact information in the show notes. We'd also like to encourage you to share the podcast, leave reviews, and engage with us on social media. Always remember that behind every unsolved case, lies a victim and a family yearning for answers. Thank you for listening to Perpetrator Unknown.